I'm Sunil Dutt from Indian Institute of Public Administration, New Delhi, and this unit I will be talking to you about is on governance and good governance. The aim of this unit is to introduce the basic concepts of governance and good governance. After going through the unit, you would be able to list out the concepts of governance and good governance. Secondly, understand the different perspectives on governance. Thirdly, describe the contemporary issues and challenges related to governance. We start with introduction. The term government in Anglo-American political theory refers to the formal institutions of the state and their monopoly of legitimate coercive power. Government is characterized by its ability to make decisions and its capacity to enforce them. In particular, government is understood to refer to the formal and institutional processes which operate at the level of the nation state to maintain public order and facilitate collective action. Theoretical work on governance reflects the interests of this social science community in a shifting pattern in styles of governing. The traditional use of governance and its dictionary entry defines it as a synonym for government. Yet, in the growing work on governance, there is a redirection in its use and re-import. Rather, governance signifies a change in the meaning of government, referring to a new process of governing or a changed condition of ordered rule or the new method by which society is governed. Governance is ultimately concerned with creating the conditions for orderly rule and collective action. The outputs of governance are not therefore different from the government. It is rather a matter of a difference in processes. Now, what is the concept of governance? The concept of governance came to light in 1980. The main objective of the governance is the welfare of the state. It is directed to the common citizen. Administration means structured bureaucracy, rules and regulations, but governance means the most efficient form of administration. There is a lot of difference between government and governance. Government is pillar, while governance is building, government is skeleton, governance is flash, government is rigid, governance is simple, narrow perspective, broader perspective, negative. In nature, it is positive in nature. It deals with policy making, other one deals with policy implementation. Government deals with maintenance of law and order, and the governance deals with mainly welfare of the state. So, in view of these differences, governance is citizen friendly and people friendly, related to common man, human being and welfare and efficiency in administration. Government institutions are created in every country or nation in the world, but they are not performing well according to the expectations of the people. This is not only because of the internal factors, but also external factors or surrounding factors in the current nations. The levels of the expectation of the people in the nations are increasing in human aspirations, creating new dimensions to the process of administration and governance. Thus, the governance takes the lead in adjusting to meet the requirements of the people's new aspirations and demands of the people in the present context of national growth and changing world scenario. Governance helps us in bridging the government and people and resulting in building the confidence of the government. Therefore, governance focuses on results, service quality and public satisfaction. Thus, resultant fact is that internal management of the government of a country, liberal democracy is the philosophy of governance. A government in general gives the framework of action and guidelines for the administrative machinery. But the governance is more than that. The existing social and economic conditions along with existing institutions are now contrary to each other sometimes. Conflict is going on between these two people's protests and demands. Demands are increasing day to day. Bringing necessary reforms to meet these demands is very essential. Citizen-centered administration rather than rule-based within the democratic functioning systems. This involves the equitable distribution of different assets among all the sections of the people, keeping in mind their aspirations and demands on the government. This is to be achieved through governance. Now, what is the meaning and definition of governance? Since the second half of the 1990s, the literature in public administration mainly throws light on governance. Indeed, at times the term governance seems to have replaced public administration in the literature. It is difficult to find a commonly agreed upon definition of governance. World Bank prescription on governance is something different. What it says that governance is the act of exercising control over the actions of people. World Bank in its report defined governance as the exercise of political power to manage a nation's affairs. In another document titled Governance and Development, which was published in 1992, the World Bank defines governance as the manner in which power is exercised in the management of a country's economic and social resources for development. The World Bank has further defined three distinct aspects of governance, that is the form of political regime, the process by which authority is exercised for managing a country's economic and social resources for development, and finally, the capacity of the government to design, formulate and implement policies and discharge functions. This definition of governance has been further expanded by other agencies to include the degree of democratization to prove legitimacy of the state, media freedom, transparency in administration, to promote accountability of government, individual and group rights, people's participation in administration, to establish the rule of law in respect for human rights, and finally, competence of government to formulate policies and deliver services to the public. Now, we come to UNDP's perspective on governance. The concept of governance has been found to have varying definitions. Among them, the United Nations Development Program UNDP provides a more elaborated definition which says governance is the exercise of economic, political and administrative authority to manage a country's affairs at all levels. It comprises mechanisms, processes and institutions through which citizens and groups articulate their interests, exercise their legal rights, meet their obligations and mediate their differences. This definition further indicates that governance has two major components, a country and its citizens. Governance is how a political entity, that is the state, organizes and administers its functions through exercising powers via its various agencies, and in addition, governance includes the sum of procedures, actions and entities available to citizens in order to enable them to conduct numerous operations such as communicating their concerns, exercising their rights, undertaking their responsibilities and arbitrating their disputes. Now, the Global Development Research Center GDRC in 2004 gives a further definition for governance. It says the concept of governance refers to the complex set of values, norms, processes and institutions by which society manages its development and resolves conflicts formally and informally. It involves not only the state but also the civil society at the local, regional, national and global levels. It is a wider definition. This definition shows that GDRC considers governance as how a country manages its internal affairs. In addition, it identifies the actors in governance as including the state as a political entity and the different levels of civil society. As a way of defining governance, the International Institute of Administrative Sciences (IIAS) differentiates between government and governance. It says government is an institution that consists of a set of sub-institutions, namely the constitution, legislature, executive and judiciary. To further define governance, the IIAS identifies a number of components of which the concept is comprised. Thus, the degree of legitimacy, representativeness, popular accountability and efficiency with which public affairs are conducted. This suggests that there are 4 elements by means of which governance may be assessed. The presence of mechanisms that legitimize a system of and structures, processes and actors, and the extent to which the systems, institutions and their actions are representative and accountable to the general public. Clearly, the definition of governance varies according to the institution. Each institution produces a definition of the term in question by highlighting one element or a set of elements that make up the nature of governance. Nevertheless, they have one element in common. Government is just one actor among several whose internal and external interactions with other actors such as the civil society, the private sector and the general public shape governance. Now, different views in Indian scriptures on governance. The foundation of good governance, which is required to protect and sustain the good of all, and the requisite duties and conduct of public officials have been already described in the various scriptures of Hindu religion and cultural context with this. The foundation of good governance is dharma, righteousness. The king, his ministers and his state employees who have taken the oath of their offices to uphold dharma and to act in accordance with the common good must not act unjustly or unethically so as to secure their private good through selfishness. If they do not behave appropriately, they all will surely go to hell along with destroying the moral basis of governance. The Kautilya's Arshas says a king is expected to behave in a most righteous manner. In the happiness of his subjects lies his happiness, in their welfare his welfare. Whatever pleases him personally he shall not consider as good, but whatever makes his subjects happy he shall consider good. The king should look to the bodily comforts of his servants by providing such emoluments as can infuse in them the spirit of enthusiasm to work. He should not violate the course of righteousness and wealth. Thus the king shall not only maintain his servants, but also increase their subsistence and wages in consideration of their learning and work. From a public management perspective, governance may usefully be defined as regimes of laws, rules, judicial decisions and administrative practices that constrain, prescribe and enable the exercise of public authority on behalf of the public interests. Thus, governance refers to the governability of a polity, or in other words, the capacity of a political system to govern efficiently and to provide the necessary political conditions for socio-economic development. Governance refers to the decision making and implementation process in the administration of a country, state or organization. At the country, state level, governance is the exercise of political, economic and administrative authority. In the management of multifarious affairs, it comprises the complex mechanisms, processes and institutions through which citizens and groups articulate their interests, mediate their differences and exercise their legal rights and obligations. Good governance is participatory, transparent and accountable. It is effective in making the best use of resources and personal and is equitable. Basically, it promotes justice and ensures the rule of law. Now, what are the contemporary issues and challenges? Contemporary public organizations also must negotiate societal compliance with their decisions and negotiate compliance with the contracts for service delivery. Instead of implementing public programs directly through law and other authoritative means. Governing in most industrialized democracies has become a process of bargaining and mediating rather than of applying roles. In most developing countries, which are torn with social and ethical divisions and faced with internal and external terror, it is difficult even for a competent and well-institutioned government to achieve conditions for good governance. The sheer lack of governing capacity also constrains the ability of public authorities to fulfill their responsibilities. The challenge of governance in any state is not competitive populism or fulfillment of some wish list. It is in restoring the basic values to those institutions and ensuring their sustenance through truly autonomous watchdog processes. Legislator should legislate and exercise supervision on government policies and spending instead of messing up the day-to-day administration. The executive should concentrate on fair and equitable governance and efficient delivery of public services instead of hankering after power and perks. The judiciary would focus on speedy justice not only for the high and mighty but also for the low and the weak. For this to succeed, the government should take a deliberate decision not to act as big brother and breathe down the neck of individuals and institutions. This itself could be an effective antidote to the cancer of corruption that is eating into the vitals of our society. That government is the best which governs the least. These famous words of Hugh Dalton must echo in the ears of our good politicians. Now we come to good governance. What is good governance? As in the various understanding of the concept of governance, good governance has also been viewed differently with various definitions. For the World Bank, good governance is epitomized by predictable, open and enlightened policy making, a bureaucracy imbued with professional ethos, an executive arm of government accountable for its actions, and a strong civil society participating in public affairs and all behaving under the rule of law. That is the precondition. In this definition, the World Bank highlights 4 elements that make up the building blocks of good governance: transparency and predictability in policy making, professionalism in bureaucracy, accountability of government, and participation of the civil society which swears by the law. With regard to UNDP, good governance is described as being, among other things, participatory, transparent and accountable. It is also effective and equitable, and it promotes the rule of law fairly. Good governance ensures that the voice of the poorest and the most vulnerable are heard in decision making, in the allocation of development resources, and that political, social and economic priorities are based on broad consensus among the 3 stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? The state, private sector and the civil society. This definition identifies the attributes that comprise the concept of good governance, which are as follows, listed number wise. Number 1, adoption of a participatory approach. 2, transparency and openness. 3, accountability through assuming responsibilities for actions. 4, effectiveness. 5, equity and fairness. 6, endorsement of the rule of law. 7. Openness in decision making and concern towards vulnerable social groups. 8. Formulation of the national agenda through a consensus between state, private sector and civil society. From another perspective, the UNDP lists 9 underlying characteristics of good governance. They are participation, rule of law, transparency, responsiveness, consensus orientation, equity, effectiveness and efficiency, accountability, strategic vision. Various institutions, international organizations and authors reported different indicators of good governance, but it is generally agreed that the quality of government institutions can be evaluated by assessing the quality of governance. Now, what are the prerequisites to good governance? While there are many different views about what constitutes good governance, we can agree upon a minimum of core characteristics. First, political masters and the public officials are held accountable to the rule for their actions through clearly formulated and transparent process. That is the first condition. Second, there is something called the rule of law. This means that the citizens are legally protected from any arbitrary or capricious action by public authorities. The rule of law is based on the enterprise of independent judiciary. The legal order that is established on this foundation serves to regulate relations between individuals and groups within a society as well as between citizens and the state. Thirdly, public agencies are seen to be responsive to the needs of the public. In addition, it is important to ensure that development is promoted for the benefit of all citizens in an equitable manner. Now we come to fourth condition. The requisite information is available which will permit accountability, markets to function and laws to be correctly applied. Fifthly, implementation of policies and laws is of considerable importance for achieving good governance. Without effective implementation capability, a stalemate follows of unintended effects which frustrate the government's development efforts, and without an effective public administration, no government can be effective, however benevolent it may be. In this perspective, the issue now is whether governance should be state-centric or society-centric. In a democracy, as distinct from an autocracy, governance should be society-centered. It should include government, which in its dominant part, but transcend it by taking in the private sector and the civil society. All three are critical for sustaining human, economic and social development. The government creates a conducive political, legal and living environment. The private sector promotes enterprise and generates jobs and income. The civil society facilitates interaction by mobilizing groups to participate in economic, social and political activities. Because each has weaknesses and strengths, democratic governance is achieved through constructive interaction among all the three.